unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Hudson Hamlin, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Oakland, and you're listening to...
I'm Mark Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object. We have an unidentified flying object.
All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm sure you heard the opening more than once. That's okay. Hey, welcome to the world of technical difficulties. Today you get
We have an unidentified flying object.
basically essentially two different shows. Guest was which was not all of the senators, which was to push him through to actually get voted. They made a point on every news station or any article you read online that would say almost all senators will at least approve that process to get that person to the confirmation, but several of them will change their mind. But that didn't happen. So you live right by the swamp. Is that affecting you in any way?
Brother, I live in the swamp. I mean,
That's
literally in the swamp. I am a mile and a half away from the lovely house that Donald Trump is reigning supreme, where the basketball court is being dumped. And I hate to say, but I can't wait till the day the Department of Agriculture becomes something of a new knower, because I think they really need to put under the Department of Agriculture, the FDA, and a bunch of things. The reality is that, to answer your question, I see a lot of things going on. I see a lot of changes that should have been done long time ago affecting the city. The only thing I have a question on is the federal, to be honest, I got to be honest with this, is why is it that you're going to make marijuana statewide legal and the kids themselves can't get the jobs because corporations cannot get them jobs, because most of the jobs out there you have to take a urine test for. But outside of that, that's the only question I have about what's going on in the city. I mean, we got the departure of ambassadors. Well, they have to come back here for debriefing. We have the growth of industry in the city, which Trump is doing. We have the federal allowance of money going towards the infrastructure, bridges, streets. That's going well. We have a city life that's blossoming with new and more exotic individuals, especially from different cultures and different countries. So people, you need to stop saying that, you know, everybody in America who's from another country is getting kicked out. It's not happening. It's an imagination that the fake media and those Democrats are throwing at you. I have to quote the word, Maxine water.
Yes, yes. Low IQ Maxine, like I said, she lives, or her office is not very far from me. Fortunately, I'm not in her district. But then again, part of me wishes I was, because then she would actually have to respond to people like me, her constituents. But she is very adamant that if you are not in her district, she will not communicate with you in any way. Now, you mentioned something very important. The fact that marijuana is literally a Schedule 1 drug in DC, all of DC, or the United States, the federal government. But you have places like California, Nevada, Seattle, Colorado, Seattle, Washington. I think it's Washington or Oregon, as well as, like I said, Colorado, where it's recreational. You can buy it just like you can buy beer or liquor. And when you said the problem is when these kids have it in their system, that's one of the big reasons skydivers, the instructors, don't smoke at all, because they get tested regularly. So the sad thing is they could drink till 4 or 5 a.m. and sleep off maybe 2 3 hours of it, and they'll get on the plane and take a student. But if they had smoked marijuana, say 3 weeks ago, and it was in their system, they'd get fired. That is a very huge double standard. But you being in DC, I did hear, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that Donald Trump is allowing each state to allow them to make their own decisions of what they're going to do. Basically, the separation of the federal government and the states. Have you heard anything about that? And what's it like in Metro DC? Can you buy medical or recreational marijuana?
Well, let's start off. I agree. It should be a state-run issue. Washington, D.C. is not a state. It is a federal district. People need to get that out their system real quick, because here we are guided by the laws of the federal district and those of the federal government. That's the first thing. Yeah, I agree. Each state should have its right to decide upon the laws concerning marijuana. Now, I don't see any reason why a state should not accept it unless the FDA chooses to ignore the health benefits. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say health benefits? It's almost like talking about mushrooms. Oops. Yeah, it absorbs radiation. Health benefits. I'm talking about Fukushima radiation, California. Oops, right there in your ocean. But yeah, back to DC. The regulations here are simple. Corporations or businesses decide whether they accept it, and most of them won't, because the insurance policies and rates will go up, because say a person was using the recreational drug marijuana, i.e. you, me, or anybody else, so they're concerned. And we decided we work on a construction site.
A lot of people thought after January 1st in California there'd be a lot of tourism for recreational marijuana, but there really isn't. I don't think it changed very much before, when it was medical to recreational, other than the taxes, because almost everybody in California who was smoking got their medical license. By the way, it was so cheap back in the day. I mean, some doctors would give it to you for $25 and it would last for a good year. You could make any reason you want. Oh, I need to sleep, or I get nerves, or I just crave it. Whatever you wanted to say, they were literally doctors just for that. And I'm sure now they're probably, looking for some sort of other business. Now, speaking of DC, let me ask you this, Darrell. I know you were in the military and you've been around a lot of different places, stationed in different bases. Were you raised in DC?
I was greatly raised in this area from the age of 8 years old. I actually went to Stevens Middle School, Stevens Hardy Elementary. Then I went to St. John at my middle school years, from St. John College High School, which is a college military preparatory high school. Christian brothers, unlike my man Kavanaugh, who went to, the Jesuit side. And I have to congratulate Kavanaugh for being a justice. Thank you so very much. I'm sorry, Alyssa Milano, but you lost again. And excuse me, when it came to that court hearing, the big, huge problem in the entire case was, I don't know. I don't remember.
Let me ask you this. This is actually a really scary thought. If you have all these people in Hollywood entertainment who clearly are making a lot of money, you would think they're capitalists. Why would they want to become Democrats and be associated with socialism?
Well, let's put it this way. Everybody wants a change in some form of way. And with the influx of the Soros money going into the United States government, sorry, not the government, private industry, quote unquote, the nonprofits, quote unquote, again, I will state, and into industry itself, be it jobs, people will flux to anything. But when it comes to Hollywood, Hollywood is looking for something to promote a quote unquote cause. And that's what Soros is made for. I want to create controversy where there is none. I want to create an image where it's not there. Hollywood obliges because Hollywood believes that it'll gain me more fame. It'll make me different. You know, what they say when you're an actor on stage, you're supposed to be different from the others, or you're supposed to stand out. Hollywood is the same way. When it comes to the ideology of Hollywood, being the seat of media for the United States, next to Atlanta, New York, Chicago, and I would even say Miami, Florida. And of course, you got to say also Orlando because you got Disney.
That's right.
You never forget those Disney kids from back then and the Justin Bieber kids today. Excuse me. I had to take a giggle on that one. I mean, I could see Justin Bieber trying to be political. The idea is simple. Hollywood believes that as long as there's a charge, something to stand them out. Yes, we all know that in the background, a lot of the actors of Hollywood will agree with Trump. The rest of them outrightly will say, no, I don't agree. But when it comes to that voting booth, you can't fool us because you want what's better for not only your country, but for yourself and your family. So the bottom line is the trade deals that Trump has come up with, be it material that is consumable or non-consumable, the trade deals help Hollywood just as much because they're in a battle with the media industry in China, UK, and don't forget, Bollywood.
Speaking of the trade deals, there's actually a few things you said that I want to talk about, but specifically the trade deals. I was talking to someone from Canada who lives in Canada right now as we speak. He's going to be a guest. I don't want to say his name to spoil it for everyone, but when he started talking about what is your president doing with these tariffs and this and that, you know, it's kind of hard to tell someone about their nation, about their beliefs and why free trade, because they thought it was already free trade as it was when they're getting more benefits. Instead, we were the biggest piggy bank in the entire world. But at the same time, this guy was like getting really argumentative, talking about the fact that Donald Trump is really bad. He's having all these tariffs and trade deals with everybody. It's going to make things worse. But is it really? I don't think so. I mean, for crying out loud, we have GDP higher than, I don't want to say a lot, like forever or decades. I couldn't tell you the exact year, but it's pretty darn high. Another thing is the unemployment rate. That is very low. And this is only not even 2 years into this new administration. So now here's the other part of that question, the comment I wanted to talk to you about. George Soros. He's always talked about as the person who wants to create the New World Order. He's always funding people who are causing, I guess, problems for the United States. Is there anything that you can say about him that would explain why this super billionaire is trying to derail the free nations of this world?
Okay, you have to go back into the history of Soros in order to go that route. When you're looking at George Soros, you're looking at a man who has political ambitions that are growing and growing beyond where he originally started, i.e., he started with taking the non-aligned Soviet countries that during the time that Soviet, actually before that too, he had investments inside those countries, meaning Bosnia, Azerbaijan, so forth and so on, Armenia. Then from there, he's the man that bankrupted the Bank of England. It kind of reminds me of what, you know, the Rothschilds did during World War II when they took over the Bank of England. Then you got him spreading his ideology through the Southern Hemisphere. He can't invade China. He can't invade Russia because they got strong leaders. But guess what? He came to the United States where he has an office in New York. And, you know, he's sitting back pretty and laughing because he could buy people. That's the key. Now, to talk about George Soros, you're talking about like the Dark Master himself.
Yes.
If you look at Star Wars, he would be the one that trained Darth Vader. I mean, that's a good way of putting it. Soros wants to invade this country by putting his ideology, which is socialism and communism, because you know you got to have somebody in control.
The Clintons and Soros seem to be very tight, and I'm sure even if they're out of the picture and they're
never
for
out
instance,
of the picture.
Well, exactly. They always have their hands in pies all over the world. Whether Hillary is giving speeches at these giant banks for huge sums of money, or Bill, or their books, or their Clinton Foundation, which obviously is used to funnel some money. And I'm only saying this because of things that have come out.
Did you say the word money laundering? Oops, I'm sorry. I said that out loud, didn't I? Especially when...
I didn't say the word laundering, but
oh, yeah. Did you say Haiti? Haiti? Did you say Haiti? I mean, people forget about Haiti, Puerto Rico, you know, money laundering. Clintons, lots of money came in, and just a couple $1,000s went out. Yeah, okay. Continue, Dr. J.
Yeah, and the sad thing is with Haiti, and this is one of the videos that I had posted on my YouTube channel, was the top 10 staged media events. And one of them, it talks about, I'm sure I told you this before, or you at least heard it me talking with another guest before. After 9/11, the percentage of people that thought that it was Osama bin Laden was very small. With the propaganda, 6 months later, the percentage went up to somewhere in the 30s. I'm just guessing based on what I recall from seeing it enough times. But after we had been in Iraq and had been in Afghanistan for at least a year, more than half the people started to believe that bin Laden was behind it and Iraq had something to do with it. And the scary part is yet we're talking about that, and there's all these people in Haiti who are sick and dying from the earthquake. They're not getting the help they need, but that's not the way our media works. They're going to throw us propaganda in the way they want us to see something, as opposed to the way the real reality is. And honestly, that's a really sad thought. And that's why I really appreciate independent radio like this, because you can say things that are, well, aside from cussing and violating those rules, but we can say things that are not going to be told by someone at the very top or some sort of CEO. Hey, focus your story on this, or don't focus on this candidate or this candidate. But yeah, Puerto Rico and Haiti and any country.
Oh, Louisiana. Louisiana, too. Don't forget, they got hit.
Yeah.
And Soros, he said, oh, and don't forget some of your great church ministers as well, Dr. J. Like, what's the guy's name in Texas? Joel Osteen. You remember? He shut his doors. I mean, there's so much out there, and you can tell where the hands of socialists, communistic, democratics are running rampant. But the problem I have to say, honestly, it's not all about the money. No, because, they're going to collect their money off of you. Yeah. You got the good reverend needs that $70 million jet, so they're going to make sure they get that money. And you can keep praying. Go ahead. I'm going to be honest with you. Keep on praying and give that man that money. Or keep on playing with the way times really are and give these organizations that are unjustifiably bold lying to you. I mean, they said, let's be honest, Dr. J, Trump is a racist. That's the first thing they said. Where is it? I mean, we got
racist, misogynist, and a whole lot of other things.
Yeah, homophobe and all this stuff. And you know something? Can I ask y'all a question? I got to ask the whole public this real question.
Sure.
Who told them that this indoctrinated ideology of Trump is true? Because that man ran a corporation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
How can you be that way running a business? I run a business. Ellen Radio Network is a business. There are lots of businesses out there. Are you trying to tell me that man's going to run the entire country not as a? I'm sorry. You honestly believe that this is a democratic society? No, this is a corporation. This is actually a republic, not a democracy. Deal with it, people. Get the truth in your heads, because I'm sorry. It's frustrating when you honestly sit back and you get these individuals that believe that what they've been learning is true. And Dr. J, I have to tell you, it hurts me that the educational system is allowing this crap.
I honestly don't blame you. That's a very scary thought, and we are in some sense a corporation, and people think they have power, but we really don't. Not to the extent that people would want to hope for, or our founding fathers said so. And that was one of the big topics with Tony Gosling. I know we ran out of time and we didn't get a chance to really go into that much detail of it. Of course, there were a lot of questions that came in, but that group of people, which includes billionaires, heads of states, princes, princesses, kings, and queens, they meet every single year, and I'm sure you know why the name of the Bilderberg is called that way, because of the Bilderberger Hotel. And it's in a different area each time. And what they're supposed to do, or what they do according to the people who have infiltrated it, such as Alex Jones, is they will literally say, okay, you Queen of Spain, you Mr. Kissinger, and you from wherever, Saudi Arabia, you three are going to decide the world economy for the next year. They're going to split up different groups for different people. And when you think about it that way, not only is the U.S. not in control, that goes to show you how much the world is really not in control, except for these handful of people.
Yeah, so true. But here's a key aspect that people keep forgetting it. It's man-made. Once again, you are being influenced. Once again, you are being suckered. And Dr. J, I got a good man that wants to hop on right now to talk about this too. The great Robert D. Morningstar. Can we bring him in, Dr. J?
Absolutely, since he was going to be on in the second half anyway.
Oh, he's got a look. He's ramping up. I can feel him right now. He's a little
hot.
But you know something? I have to be honest with you, that the more of this indoctrination, this lying, this process that we go through, it just affects not only us, it affects our children. It's just like we were eliminating the ideas of racism slowly but surely. But when Obama came back into office, the world went topsy-turvy because they started saying he's the first black. He's the first black. Why can't he be an American? Well, because he's not an American. Sorry, people. I diffused that one too, didn't I? Because he's not American. So now, when you go outside this country, you get people that are different nationalities. Why is it that in America you have to deal with this aspect of everyone being a color? And somebody help me with that ideology.
I couldn't answer that because I didn't even know what a racist was until I was older than most people, because where I grew up, everybody mingled together. You know, everybody was friends, as at least the schools that I went to, until I started getting older and going out more. And when I started going to places where there are different groups, like violent groups, the gangbangers, the I don't know, the jocks would be one word. That's when I really started to see the separation of people in groups within schools. And within those groups, I started to see the first signs of racism, which I still could not boggle, because you know as well as I do that if I have a heart problem, or say if I needed, say, a kidney or some, if I needed some sort of transplant, I can get it from you and it'll work exactly identical on me, assuming we're the same blood type. The inside of us is identical. We bleed the same blood. What the heck does it matter what the outside is?
Yeah, I guess who's on board? We got Brother Robert Morningstar. But I want to hit you with one more question. Why is it that kids have to learn it from their parents? Or just like religion, you learn it from your parents. It's an indoctrination process. But I know Brother Morningstar is going to drill on that one, and I know he's definitely going to drill about how stupid these people are in trying to destroy our president, especially the Dark Master himself. Thank you.
That's right, Robert. Let's hear it.
Well, I think the best answer to that is if I sang you a little song from South Pacific.
Sure.
You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed into your little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. That's what it is, brothers. Indoctrination at a very early age. And I'm sure we've seen those videos of the Ku Klux Klan indoctrinating little Klansmen at 5 with their hoods on. But at the same time, we've seen the Sharia Islam cleaving the heads of their 5-year-old boys. I don't know if you people know about this ritual, the Sharia. You can tell Muslims the two kinds, Sunni and Shia. And you can tell the Shia because they have a scar on their foreheads. They have a ritual, a baptism in blood at 5 years old, where the child is brought out into this great parade, men only, of course, and they go, each of them, to have their heads clipped. You know, they hit with a straight razor or a little knife, and they clock them right on the head, and they start bleeding, and the blood starts rushing over their faces, and they march on in this parade, chanting on and on how they want to die like Ali, you know, the martyr, the son-in-law of Muhammad, who Muhammad wanted to take over the business. That's what it is, actually, the business. So religion, yes, indoctrinates people at a very early age to look at everyone else as other, not us. So that's what you inspired in me.
One thing that Darrell and I were talking about before we brought you on was the fact that the U.S. is a corporation. I know you know a lot of topics, and you are just as good of a guest as you are a host, which is why for all those people listening out there, I'm going to say it again. Robert Morningstar is my fill-in host, my official fill-in host for Dr. J Radio Live, because I know he's qualified enough to do so and to deliver a damn good show for all of you. But speaking of that corporation, because I've heard Darrell. I'm going to say this to you, Darrell, and I'm going to ask the question to Robert. I've heard that the IRS is. I know some people have tried to show me, I don't want to say it's a. There's no trademark number or anything like that, but there is something to basically show that it is not just a normal branch of the government. And I think it was in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, charter. It's
there
chartered.
you go.
I wouldn't I wouldn't even call it a charter. It's a business that was aligned because they needed every corporation has to have, and I'm gonna say it again, an audit department. It has to have somebody to handle its books because there's finances coming in. I wouldn't even call them a charter. I would call them an independent supposed independent industry business that is supposed to be the overshadow the looker for the funds that are coming in. But I'm still trying to figure out how the Department of Defense can be missing billions of dollars if you have that overshadow, but they can jump on you for missing you didn't check this box, or you didn't report that you bought a new car, or how about this, you had a child but you didn't put them on your tax form.
I think that's because the IRS doesn't audit the military. The military has its own financial system, to be honest with you, funding. It is overseen by the Congress and a department that's called the Office of Budget and Management.
Right. And they need to.
So the IRS is not involved directly with them. What I would say is we have to make a distinction between the Federal Reserve and the federal government. It's camouflage. It's neurolinguistic weasel words that they had to cover up this new relationship between the federal government and the federal bank, the central bank, which is the Federal Reserve. And so they assigned the name federal to the bank so that people in their head would think it's part of the federal government. Then the IRS is the auditing and collection arm of the Federal Reserve. And all of this came into being November 22nd, 1913.
Robert, I got a question, Robert. Now,
sure.
How did we become an entity of the federal banks? Because if you said the IRS audits the federal banks and is supposedly a portion part mutual trust with the reserve. I'm trying to get it as low as possible, and I can't figure out the word. Why do they audit us as individuals?
Here's what happened. They instituted that, and then they had the Depression, 1928 crash. And they had 3 years of depression till Roosevelt was elected president. And Roosevelt came in and then established the United States as a corporation to do business with the Federal Reserve in exchange for monies that they lent for the Works Progress Administration and all of the programs that for him to get money from the Federal Reserve, he had to offer collateral. And what they came up with was the collateral was to be the lifetime production of the American worker. They would get a percentage of the lifetime production of the American worker, whose average was thought to be in a lifetime they could earn $1 million, an average worker, in the course of 40 years of, or maybe more, because 45 years of working, let's say from 20 to 65, they calculated every citizen should make $1 million. And so every citizen was turned into a share of stock, right? And shares of stock, when you buy stock, they're numbered. So each share of stock got a Social Security number.
Oh, we're a commodity, huh?
Yeah, that's right. In a similar way, later on, the banks in the 2007 after the crash. What led up to it was an interesting thing that the banks used the credit debt of let's say credit card holders. Let's say 1,000 people owed $5,000. That's $5 million. So what they did, but that's all individual, right? 1,000 accounts, they owed $5,000. So what they did is they bundled the accounts into one tranche. That's what they called it, TRAU.
Yes. Yeah, TRANCHE.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, with that tranche, they could then take that tranche and offer that as a bundle to the Federal Reserve so that they could borrow cash on that at the rate of $10 to $40 per dollar of the debt. And that's what led ultimately to the bubble and then the collapse of the bubble. It's criminal activity. Here's another way that they were making a tremendous amount of money. The banks here in the United States borrowing that money from the Federal Reserve could lend it to banks in Asia overnight for 0.5% to 1.5% for the use of it overnight. With electronic banking, this is possible. So let's say Chase Bank got $5 million in a tranche, and they had it from the Federal Reserve. Electronically, they could lend that $5 million. It would be shifted to Hong Kong for our night is their day, right? We're sleeping, they're banking. So then they would use that $5 million in their system, then return it the next night with a 1.5% interest given to Chase Bank for doing what? Pushing a couple of buttons on a computer. It's not real money. I mean, it's numbers. And that's but when we had cash, that was a different story. And this is, I don't know, I don't want to get long-winded on economics, but you got me started, buddy.
Well,
Yeah?
hey, let me interject this. The fact that Richard Nixon took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard begs the question of why, because currency is supposed to be based on something tangible. Now, like you said, everything's computer, everything's literally in some sort of file on the net. If you have a good hacker, you could take your dollar that you might have in your bank account and add several zeros to it, and if you're really slick about it, I mean, you could probably get away with it. And I wouldn't be surprised if people do that, exactly that.
They try to do that, but you're very psychic, incredibly psychic, because that is exactly what the next word out of my mouth is going to be about Nixon, the economics of the petrodollar. So that's the one thing. I don't like Nixon, and I still don't like Nixon. I don't like Nixon even more after 2 weeks ago interviewing his personal courier and personal assassin, a guy who was ordered to kill people for Nixon by Nixon and his henchmen. Ordered to kill a professor at American University and to firebomb the university because they were very actively anti-war against Nixon's program in Vietnam. But the one thing I have to say that Nixon is a diabolical genius, and he saved the United States from collapse. And the way he did it was ingenious. It was that at the time Nixon took office, we had no money. The whole thing had been spent in Vietnam and in the Great Society programs, and there was no money to be had. At the same time, Americans during the heyday of Vietnam had a lot of money and were traveling to Europe and spending tremendous sums of money overseas. So when money was money, meaning cash, American Express checks, not electronic, all of these things had to be returned in bundles to the United States on weekly shipments. For example, from France, all the American money that had been spent in France had to be returned in order to be cashed in, you see, for credit. Well, what happened was there was this tremendous amount of greenbacks out overseas, and it was going to come in and destroy our economy because we had nothing to repay with. So Nixon devised a plan and an agreement with Saudi Arabia and OPEC that when they wanted to raise the price of oil under threat of war, he made a deal with them that that they could raise the price of oil under one condition, which was that all the countries on earth had to pay for oil in American dollars. And that forestalled the flood of that cash that we couldn't pay, right? It kept it there in the other countries because they then had to hoard American dollars in order to pay for oil. And that's genius.
Let me say this: isn't or aren't certain countries, specifically Russia, and I know before Gaddafi died, he wanted to create an African gold coin, but aren't they trying to get the entire world off the U.S. dollar standard with regards to petroleum?
That's the whole point of the wars that we've had. The wars with Iraq and the war with the destruction of Libya, wasn't really a war, was because, and Iran. Okay, these three countries, Libya, Iran, and Iraq, their leaders decided to say, forget about it, to the United States, to avoid a more crude phrase. And they decided to establish oil markets, bourse. In Iran, it's called B-O-U-R-S-E, bourse, basically an oil trading stock market in which they were going to accept yen and rubles and francs, marks now, and the currencies of all the other countries was going to be accepted. And that's what Saddam Hussein started to do. That's what Iran planned to do as far back as 2007, 2008. And that's what Libya was doing as well. And that is the great international crime, to try to sell your oil, avoiding the American PetroDollar agreement. So that's where it stands, and that's why we had to go to war several times.
Darrell, what's your take on that?
I mean, I see the United States government as, during that time period of the Vietnam War, the same way Robert has actually stated. And the problem that Nixon really had was he was for himself and his corporate interest, which are his cronies. I don't really want to say too much about Nixon because he was a dirty dog, and he was about self and his corporate cronies. And also you have to understand that there was a huge flux of oil that came in, and the industry itself in the United States, oil, grew and blossomed also during that time period. But also,
well, we have to go back even farther, Darrell. We have to go back to the 1950s, and who was Nixon? You talk about his group. Let's call a spade, and that is his group was the Bush Cabal. Yes. Prescott Bush enlisted him. Prescott Bush put out an ad in 1947 in California requesting someone who was willing to do basically dirty tricks and become a congressman. And the only person that answered the ad was Richard Nixon. So Prescott Bush financed his campaign and got him elected to office. And there's a now famous photograph of three men wearing hats. And the tall man is adjusting the short man's hat with another man in between them. So the tall man adjusting the short man's hat is Prescott Bush. The short man, beaming up, looking at his boss, having his hat adjusted or his hat put on his head, is Nixon. And in between them is none other than Jack Ruby, 1947.
Wow. Okay, that's actually taking me by surprise. I've never known that connection. I know George Herbert Walker Bush and Jack Ruby were obviously connected. And from what I know, obviously you're now, especially since Jim Mars has passed away, you are the leading authority on JFK, among other things, of course. Wasn't Jack Ruby associated with the FBI, put there by Hoover to spy on the CIA, or as I like to say it, clowns in America?
Wow, that's a deep way of looking at it. I thought
It's
Jack Ruby was.
yeah,
Yeah, I was
yeah.
going to say, I found a document about 4 years ago, which was a letter from Richard Nixon's staff as congressman, asking J. Edgar Hoover to take it easy on Jack Ruby because he was acting as an informant for Nixon when he was on the Anti-Crime Commission. Hey, folks, that's a sample of New York City news. That's the name
Yay.
of my show that's starting tomorrow night at 9 o'clock Eastern on this network. And so you're getting a firsthand experience of why the show is called The Sounds of New York City News.
I love the sounds of New York. I mean, fire trucks and everything else, man. It shows city life and it shows government at work, supposedly, as we can call it. But I got to say one thing. We keep forgetting the influx himself of Nelson Rockefeller when it comes to Richard
Yes.
Nixon and Gerald Ford. I mean,
Wow. Now we
yeah.
get to another part of the shadow government, the dark state. I found out about 3 years ago that during the 1950s, Nelson Rockefeller was the head of MJ-12. And now we get into that whole nexus of where the UFO secret was a big part of this overall scheme. To deny their existence, to keep out of the public eye the existence of that higher level technology and propulsion system in order to keep the military industrial system that runs on oil in power. So Rockefeller is a very important guy. You want to know something very interesting? Rockefeller and his brothers went to the Lincoln School, which was established by John Dewey, who was the guy that started to change the whole American educational system.
Mhm.
And after years and graduation at the John Dewey School, none of the Rockefellers could read. They, none of the Rockefellers could read. Everybody, they all hired lawyers and people who would do the reading for them and ask them verbal questions. There's a very interesting essay on that subject that I recommend. If you Google Rockefellers, Lincoln School, and John Dewey, you'll probably find it.
Let me say this about Rockefellers real quick. Now, I've seen pictures of Lawrence Rockefeller with Hillary Clinton while she's holding a book on UFOs. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he put a lot of money into, I mean, you could say disclosure, or at least to put
Yes.
it more to the forefront of people?
Yes, that was indeed the premise that he was pushing during the Clinton administration to have disclosure. Clinton claimed to have tried, but that they found nothing, and then he confessed on television that there was something called the permanent government that he had no power over, and he said the permanent government is a group of bureaucrats that sit in office year after year, administration after administrations, and while the party in power and the president may change, these bureaucrats stay in their positions and they obstruct all of these attempts. For example, at disclosure being one example.
Darrell, let me get your
So-
opinion on this before we run. We're already at the bottom of the hour, but let me get your opinion.
You know, I mean, when you look at the Rockefellers and how they have funneled their ideology and their quote unquote educated truths to the American public by sponsoring schools and colleges that are in medical, you wonder why the FDA and the drug cartels, i.e. legitimate drug companies like Bayer, who took over Monsanto, still exist, and various other ones. When you're looking at Richard Nixon, in summary, he was the dirtiest player in the game, and he was run by corporate interests. And even to the point, I will say that Gerald Ford was corporate interest. And they all knew George Herbert Walker Bush. All of them. You look at the connections. The lines still go to that one man. It doesn't change. And when you look at that, look where Bush ended up. He went from vice president 2 terms to president 2 terms. He fulfilled his quote unquote developmental economic destiny. And he kept his destiny alive with wars. He kept his economics alive with wars. And then you go back and look at what Nixon did. It's just a mirror image of the day and also a mirror image of times. The only difference is we went into supposedly Vietnam to fight for God only knows what. I mean, some people say it was for, to bring democracy because the French got their butt kicked there too. And we're going to prove that we are superior, but we needed the war to keep our finances available and afloat. And then on the second hand, they say that we were going there to fight the communist socialist government that was entering. But after World War II, the communist socialist government was already around the world. But we went against, Nazi Germany. But that was not communist socialist. That was a Nazi socialist party. So take note. All I can say is, people, look what you got. From the time period of World War II till even today, you got the communist socialist government and ideology around the world. And then you look at California. You got democratic communist socialists. I don't know how that works. You tell me. You tell me. I don't know how that come about.
Oh, I'm still confused. Don't get me wrong. I'm very confused about that. Now, while we're on this topic, before we go to break and bring on our other guest, speaking about George Herbert Walker Bush, the day that President Reagan was shot and fortunately lived, John Hinckley, I believe was the name, the parents of John Hinckley were dining with the Bushes. Mm-hmm. Coincidence enough, or was it a plan for that VP to become president?
Plan. It's so obvious. It's like a picture right in front of you. It's watching TV. It was a plan. And you know something? I am so glad. No, hold on. I could say, I have to say, for the American public, I'm so glad that Ronald Reagan survived the shot that was, Hold on. Can I ask you a question? Do you think he really was trying to kill Reagan?
Yes. Honestly, I really think he was trying to kill Reagan because I live by the Ronald Reagan Museum, the presidential library. And there are a lot of videos of him debating with Herbert Walker Bush before Reagan was nominated to be the Republican candidate. And you can see some of those arguments where they get really, Bush gets really angry, and he really, really, really wanted to go from the head of the CIA straight into the Oval Office. So instead, if he's VP, by default, something happens to the president, he becomes president. What better way to do that instead of waiting for the end of the term? In this case, it was 2 terms for Reagan to finish, and then get endorsed by the former POTUS to be the next POTUS. Why would he try to do this years earlier? Of all people, why would it be somebody who he was so intimate with his parents with? Clearly, I think something was going on in Hinckley's mind that maybe was suggested there. I mean, you have the former head of CIA. He could be doing things like MK Ultra or other things to make him into sort of a super soldier. Here's your mission. You're going to take care of this guy. My hands are clean because I'm all the way over here, even though I'm with your parents. And guess what? Now I'm president. And I'm really glad that Reagan did survive, because he was one of the greatest, most loved presidents in almost 40 years. I don't even think Carter garnered the same respect before him.
But the problem, I think, is
Dr. J, excuse me. Do you know the theory that Hinckley did shoot Brady and wounded all those other people, but that Reagan was not shot by a bullet? When they opened up Reagan, they couldn't find a bullet. They had a long time searching around because and a story that I've heard is that he was shot with a special kind of CIA disc gun that fired a razor-sharp disc that was made of some heavy-duty plastic, and that as a result, it was difficult for them to find it. That's something I learned many years ago.
Well, on the other side, I think the target was really James Brady.
Why would that be?
Don't know. The thing is,
Brady
James
as
Brady
the
got
Secret
hit.
Service guy?
Yeah.
No, he was an advisor.
Advisor
Brady
at
was
the
an
time.
advisor.
Okay,
He was the
okay.
assistant to the president. But the thing is, I would think it would have been James Brady was the target. He's the only one that got hit in the head. Think about that.
I don't. I think, you see, when things like that happen, that may be a distraction. You know,
That was the first shot.
right? That would take all the attention. Right. That would take all the attention of everybody there, from the sound to the first victim, and open up the scene for somebody else to fire at the president. That is stage magic. What you just described is stage magic. And that's what a magician on stage does. There's a moment when the distraction takes the audience's attention all the way to the other side of the stage. That's when the switch is made. And that would be a perfect way of executing what I just described.
But,
Hinckley,
but Reagan wasn't hitting the head.
controlling, shoot somebody else to start the event. But it's really finished off by a professional.
But you could.
Now, Darrell, why do you think Brady was the target as opposed to Reagan? I mean, if that's what I'm perceiving.
Yeah, first thought is he's the assistant to the U.S. president, but he also is the eyes and ears of the White House. Hint. Now, if there was some type of background conspiracy going on inside the White House while Reagan, with dementia walking around, and his wife is running the ship, it was Moreno was running the ship. Come on, people.
But that wasn't until much later. Reagan came in coherent and intact. It was years later, in the second administration, that those issues started to come up with the jelly beans and all of that.
Yeah, it was actually seen more. But my aunt has dementia, and I noticed it a while back. Even though she was still coherent, you noticed there was little gaps in the thought process. But the thing is, I think James Brady might have overheard something, or they thought he did. So he was actually the target. Because if they wanted, I'm sorry, I was 2130 P Street, Northwest is where I was staying at the time, and he got shot right up the hill right there by the Rite Aid. Or was it CBA? Rite Aid on top of the hill on Florida Avenue, which was literally a little jog to go see it because I went down there. I remember that year. And the whole problem I have still is Brady was in a position of a lot of knowledge on all sides. And he was not known of. And, somebody that is the assistant to the president hears and knows a lot more than what's going on, than anybody else. And he also gets to know some things about what, communication between the president and the vice president. Well, you have the vice president, George, sitting right up in there. And who knows, Brady might have got or caught a message going out or some information about the CIA since George was there.
Your theory is starting to make some sense to me in that somebody who wants to take over the Oval Office completely would want to eliminate the two principal occupants, which would have been Reagan and Brady, because, as you say, Brady might have been aware of something else and could have called an assassination and pinned it on the right people.
That's true. That's a deep thought.
Well, and also, my point is also important. In the same way, listen, the same thing happened in the assassination of Robert Kennedy. Sirhan fired from 8 feet away, but the bullet that killed Robert Kennedy left powder marks on his hair, his skin, and blackened his ear. So that gun was 1.5 inches from his head. And so the distraction is the mind-controlled idiot starts firing wildly in an MK Ultra trance, while the real assassin takes the opportunity to put the hit on the victim. And we've got proof of this, what I just said to you about Robert Kennedy, because we exposed Thane Caesar, the security guard who was, listen, the security guard was holding his arm, escorting, and in position, he was able, with his left hand holding Kennedy's right arm, he was able to bring his right hand over and put it right to his ear, and that's who did it. Kennedy wrestled with him. I want to tell the story that he fought like a lion for his life. He turned, he grabbed him by the throat, and in the process, they fell to the ground together. But in the process of grabbing him by the throat and Thane Caesar escaping, he grasped the tie. He had a clip-on tie, and Kennedy clutched that tie to his chest until he had medical relief. Then he laid it out on the floor for all the world to see, but Life magazine covered it up. So distraction is a big part of assassination.
It always is. I hate to interrupt you, Robert.
Sure.
It's funny because I'm going to have two Roberts very shortly. Everybody, we are sorry that we went a little overboard, and you're not going to get the full hour or even 55 minutes of the next guest. But stay tuned. When we come back, Robert Morningstar will still be here, and our other guest, whose name I will now tell you, Mr. Robert Zimmerman. Everybody stay tuned. We'll literally be back in 3 short minutes.
There are days